Hi everyone, hoping that you are well. We're going to be continuing our discussion today on the Moors and Moor identity and history. We're going to shift a little bit and include other data with respect to the identity and the history of the Moors. And so we were originally addressing the topic of the scriptural treatment of the identity, the construct of Moor. And now what we're going to talk about is Moor by any other name. Let's get started. And as you know, based upon our studies, that the construct of Moor, the identity of Moor, it is both multifaceted and multidimensional. And here are some constructs to keep in mind when thinking about this umbrella of what it means to be Moor. Moor is related to empires. Moor is related to confederacies. And most important, Moor is under the umbrella of what is known as superordinate goals. A superordinate goal is a goal that can only be achieved if all of the members of these various groups or these individuals work together. They have to pull their skills together. They have to pull their efforts, their resources, their time. Everything has to be pulled as they are focused on this singular goal. And so there's this single point focus. And this goal is going to be overarching and it's going to be bigger than any of their individual goals. And so when there is a superordinate goal, the individuals and the groups are able to put aside any differences in order to get to what they collectively see as the prize. So with respect to this Moor identity, this Moor construct, it means that they are able to transcend race, phenotype, they can transcend religion. That's why you will see the Moor identity attached to multiple religions, and there are many that this Moor identity happens to be attached to. You also see this ability to transcend ethnicity and culture. None of that matters with respect to the goal of the Moor, whatever that ultimate goal happens to be. None of these other things matter. They are able to transcend geography, transcend socioeconomic status, transcend everything while the eye is on the prize, whatever that prize happens to be. And that's why you see so much diversity in terms of this identity of Moor. It's not about race. It's not about religion in the traditional sense. It's not about ethnicity or culture in the traditional sense. It's not about geography. It's not about socioeconomic status. It's about that end goal. It's about the end game. And what you find when you are researching Moor or Mer, you find all of this diversity. You find all of these constructs that tie to this idea of Moor. In many ways, Moor is a byword. And so you will find Moor attached to all of these descriptors. And so those descriptors change according to languages, but they all tie together. It may look like you're not talking about the same thing at all, but these words, these constructs, they come together, they make a complete circle when it's all over. And so as we've addressed, Moor is associated with Mer. We've also discussed that Mer is associated with, it's another word for China actually. Mer is related to the word silk and Sicily. You have Maria associated with India. It's also noted that Moor is identified with Anglo-Saxons and also the Domesday Book. Moors are associated with sort of a warrior position and also associated with what are known as war elephants. Moor is definitely associated with empire wealth building. And as we've previously discussed, Moor is associated with the East or the Orient. Even though you may find individuals or collectives all around the world associating with this identity of Moor or one of its derivatives, the genesis of Moor appears to be coming out of the East, even when traveling to the West. And this is just a recap reminding that Moor or Mer translates in certain languages to porcelain, to china, to Smyrna. And what you also see here is that in the Latin, myrrh also translates to a word known as Sicily. Now, this again is related to another fragrant plant, and it is Sicily with the Cicely. Moor identity is also associated with what are known as Moor heads. One thing that you might note is that sometimes you'll see what are known as Moorish heads, and the heads will be very ornate. In some instances, however, you will see a very simplified version of the Moor's head. Now, these ornate Moor's heads are a part of the tradition and culture of Sicily. Sometimes when people are looking for Moor's heads or Moorish heads, they are tending to look for Moorish heads that have darker phenotypes. However, the Moorish heads have a variety in terms of phenotypes, a variety in terms of skin color. And this diversity in terms of phenotype makes perfect sense because, again, the identity of Moor is not tied to phenotype. You will see so much diversity in terms of phenotype with respect to Moors. And of course, there is the crossing of all of these geographic boundaries. And so you will see variety, diversity in terms of culture, in terms of religion, in terms of geopolitics. And so there is diversity that abounds with respect to the Moorish identity. However, what is consistent is the superordinate goal. And so they are collective when it comes to that. And you also see a history of Moor being related to, an outgrowth of, a contributor to Europa, the Roman Empire. You will also notice when you look at these Moor's heads that there is significant diversity even when you see a particular skin color. And so with this depiction, for instance, you see eyes that tend to be inconsistent with what you would expect with the skin color, whether you're talking about the eye color or the shape of the eyes. And here you have a flag with the Moor's heads. Make note of the fact that they have what is known as a bandage around the head, and this is consistent with that identity, that translation of Africa and a fair. When we look in Strong's Concordance, it's related to bandage. And here you see additional Moor's heads, and this is on a European flag with the eyes covered. And again, that word Africa, a fair, is related to this construct of covering. Now we're going to go back to Moor, myrrh, and that word Sicily. And here you see this byword dynamic again. And here you see that myrrh or murris odorata means Sicily. It's another word for Sicily. Morris is another word for Sicily. And it is a plant that grows in England and Scotland. It's very aromatic, very similar to the other myrrh that we discussed. This is why it is so important to keep in mind this idea of a byword being associated with Moor, because you will see the idea of a Moor changing. And you will see these descriptors associated with Moor changing. And then you will see these transliterations that you might not expect to see, because generally speaking, no one would expect to see Moor translating to Sicily. But when you look at this particular translation, you see that that Cicely translates to Sicily. Sicily. And this is simply so that you can see it more closely. And so not only do you see more Sicily related to Italy, you also see this manifestation of more Sicily, which also translates to silk, You see this in relation to Anglo-Saxons. You see this in relation to England, Scotland, and also it's integral to the Domesday Book. And you can also see that there is a root associated with sickle. Now, as you look further into this connection between Moor and myrrh and Sicily and silk, you come to the Seleucid Empire. And so Moor is synonymous with Seleucid Empire. It's synonymous with a number of empires, but this is one to also keep in mind. Now, the Iran Chamber Society carries quite a bit of information with respect to the history of the Moors and also the history of India. And so we've looked at that before, and you can check that out again. And so we're going to be looking again at another resource coming from this particular society. And what you see here is that the Seleucid Empire is not only associated with Moor in general, it is specifically associated with the Mauryan kings of northern India. And also what you have with the Mauryan kings and the Seleucid Empire is this provision of these war elephants to the Seleucid Empire in order to wage battle with their opponents in the West. Now, the Seleucid Empire was very important in terms of trade routes. And so this empire was at the center of many trade routes, and they were responsible for enriching what would be known as the kings of the earth. If you want to delve a little bit more into this particular empire, you can check this resource out. There are many resources related to this particular empire, and this is the House of Seleucus. It's important to keep in mind also, Seleucus basically means light, so house of light, luminate. So that's what you're looking at here. Of course, this is also a word or a construct that is associated with Moor, depending on what construct you're looking at, what words you're looking at, because you will see all of these different meanings for the word Moor. And it's really because Moor and its derivatives are bywords. And so you will find all of these descriptors. And the descriptor may be different based upon changed circumstances, changed geography, changed empires, but you will still see this dynamic of byword functioning. And so this is a resource to check out. You'll see multiple dynamics inside of this one text. One thing that's reiterated is this tying of Moor identity to Indian identity in terms of East Indian, and also tying Moor to commerce and specifically to silk. And so this is a part of the Moor identity. Silk is a part of the Moor identity. Myrrh is a part of the Moor identity. China is a part of the Moor identity. Italy is a part of the Moor identity. And then other parts of Europe and the rest of the world, because there has been this dispersion in terms of those who are sharing in the superordinate goals. This dispersion has taken place all over the world. And you also see this tying together of this construct of size, of being big or tall. You often see that associated with the Moor identity. And so here you see Macedonia being rooted in this idea of Highlanders. It literally means Highlanders. And you also have it meaning the tall ones, being long or large or tall. And so again, you see this related to these war elephants. As we wrap this up, there are several key takeaways. One is that Moor is a byword. It is a descriptor. And the meaning of Moor and the way Moor is understood changes with context. It changes with the languages. It changes with geography. It changes with the empire. But what is consistent happens to be this idea of this superordinate goal. And so all of the Moors and all of the derivatives of Moors all around the world are focused on whatever it happens to be, some superordinate goal or superordinate goals. What we do know is that Moor is attached to empire building, not just kingdom building, but empire building. And so there is this focus on this large collective with a centralized form of control. And so at the heart of this entire endeavor is a focus on commerce. And so there is this focus on wealth building in order to reach these superordinate goals. Finally, it's important to keep in mind that Moor is not one thing. And so you can see multiple people operating under this identity of Moor, and they may not look alike, they may not have shared culture, they may not be in the same geographic space, they may not share a number of things, but what they apparently share is a single point focus on whatever the end game happens to be for Moor and the derivative of Moor. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care. See you soon.